This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hello, and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Greetings and salutations, friends, fans, followers, and haters alike. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and good night to you. From wherever in the world you are tuning in, I say thank you. Whether you agree, disagree, or don't care about what I've got to talk about, you're here, and I appreciate it. DJ Zed bringing you the best of Discotheque Synthetica with a new Sunshine Indie Groove Pad live performance of audio loop entertainment straight to tape for your ear holes, entitled Endless Summer Grooves. It's one of the most recent tracks DJ Zed and I have collaborated on. Thank you very much to everyone else involved with the apps that helped us make it. Okay, welcome to the show, folks. I am the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and yes, I am a fictional character from a book series you have yet to read. If that activates your curiosity, please, I humbly invite you to head on over to solo.to and click on through on the Wattpad link. If this confuses you, put a pin on the corkboard. It's an imaginary corkboard that we all have in the shared podcast theater imaginarium space of our minds that we create together when we sit for these little powwows. I'll explain all of that in some past episode as you travel backwards in time with me towards the very inception of this show as you work your way through the playlist back to the oldest episodes. And I may very well explain it again sometime in a future episode. So fear not. It'll all make sense. You know what else would help is if you consider my podcast a spiraling journey and not so much a linear path. Okay, having made all those disclaimers, let's get down to it. Hello, friends. It is a hot and muggy Tuesday, September 6th, 6:45 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I am doing my best to not inhale all the invisible sediment floating around in the air brought to us by unreasonably large forest fires in the area. And before anyone starts in on the Jewish fire-starting laser beam theory, no, I've been here my entire life, and I feel somewhat confident to tell you that I see no evidence to back that up in the actual world of the forest fires that have happened historically here in my immediate local vicinity that I've been personal witness to. But I digress. That's a subject I've discussed in a past episode, and that I'm sure I'll be forced to discuss again in a future episode. There's already a pin on the corkboard. So friends, did you feel it? Despite, and I don't mean the weather, because holy moly, aren't we having some peculiar climatological phenomena throughout the place? No, but I'm talking about that other sensation beyond the disquieting discomfort of endless sequía, endless drought and fire hazard heat waves on one side of the nation, and the peculiar tsunami inundation going on the other side of these great, grand, somewhat not so united 50 states of ours. I'm talking about that other feeling of the political environment. Setting aside all the things I just referenced, and all the multiple ways people might want to argue about those things, I wanted to address this episode about this curious moment I feel happening around us now, this pause, this bizarre sort of, we don't really know which way things are going to break. We're neither celebrating nor condemning. We're just sort of lingering in this, we just had an awkward holiday, and we can talk about how awkward Labor Day is as a holiday in just a second. I mean, how many people had to work on Labor Day? How many people were forced to work? Not forced, but couldn't say no to work on a holiday that is about taking the day off because we work and we are celebrating the labor that we do, right? Did you say thank you to all the attendants and cashiers and stock clerks at any of the businesses and venues that you may have frequented during this delightful Labor Day? Now, I'm not saying that to judge anybody. I just couldn't help myself by going on a tangent about Labor Day. It's an awkward holiday, right? If you really think about it. Especially if you go out on Labor Day. Now, plenty of people just chill at home, barbecue, a shrimp on a Barbie, and some beers and stuff. Oh, wait, that's the wrong catchphrase. But you know what I'm saying. But plenty of people go out. They go out and party. They go out and watch movies. They go out to the bars. They go out to the this. They go out to the that. To these venues, to these businesses. And most everybody, whether they're going out or not, goes to the supermarket because, oh snap, I'm out of mustard. Oh shit, we don't have enough beers. Or, I didn't buy anything yet for this holiday. Here we go. And again, I'm not saying that out of judgment. I'm saying that out of like a stand-up comedy place. Of let's be funny and laugh, and then let's pause and think about it. Wouldn't the most ideal, and I'll stop here. I'll stop rambling on this tangent that I preemptively told myself I wouldn't go off on. Wouldn't the most ideal, the most really American, the most truly patriotic, the most beautifully sincere and authentic expression of a Labor Day weekend be a weekend where literally no one has to clock in. No one has to spend another day on their feet. No one has to ring up anybody else. Now, I get it. I know. I'm not some 15-year-old... No, that's an awkward age. I'm not some 19-year-old, big-eyed, green behind the ears life newbie that doesn't understand that that's really, quite impossible. I'm the guy saying it's quite impossible to create that kind of holiday because of the way we run the system that we run, that we made up. But that's a whole nother level of the discussion. let's pull back to the politics, quick friends, and then we'll try to interconnect all of this to the metaphysical. As people seem to sort of miss that part, I'm going to start bringing it a little bit stronger. This weekend traditionally feels to me like a weekend similar to, say, the 4th of July, where everyone consciously and maybe even unconsciously really does try their best to set aside political argumentation in order to just be folksy and enjoy the Americana of it. Enjoy the celebrating ourselves for the sheer act of celebrating ourselves. Now, maybe I'm creating my own sensation of this. Maybe that's just the way I feel on these kinds of days. But I most certainly felt that, like, even as the churning of chaotic slapstick level, as I totally mispronounced what I was about to say, slapstick level overreaction back and forth going on between everything about the 1-6 committee hearings and this most recent set of developments involving the Federal Bureau of Investigations searching Mar-a-Lago, which is not a private residence exclusively, right? I feel like people think that that's like Trump's castle and not a golf course club that he charges people money for the privilege of. But then again, I guess it's sort of pointless to point out to a certain demographic of American people that people are profiteering on something because they just sort of cheer the profiteering and ask you what's wrong. It's like a lot of people in America don't understand the really clear, distinct technical difference between profiting in a commercial sense, in a this is a business, therefore profits are necessary kind of way, and profiteering, which is other than entirely, right? Like it's other than the normal everyday course of business. If we were to accept consumerist, if we're going to accept the entire economic systems of systems, because it isn't one thing, but if we're going to accept it all as normal, quote unquote, and look up on the corkboard, there's a cluster of pins around a big giant fat red pin about the word normal, because does it even exist? Does normal even exist? And isn't it interesting how many different ways normal is used in society, independent of whether or not it even exists? But like I said, that's a pin on the corkboard. Let's not get sidetracked. If we were, to continue my thought, if we were to just take the economic machinery around us for granted as normal, even as it is, riddled with corruption and problematic features on all sides, in all levels, and in all departments, and in all industries, but also simultaneously acknowledging that there's problematic issues, we must also acknowledge nothing is a monolith of pure evil, right? So we just accept it all as this system, as flawed as it is, and as occasionally virtuous as it can be, because it's a big, dirty, topsy-turvy mess of a little bit of everything, in my humble opinion, and neither a monolith of pure virtue nor a monolith of pure evil, as ideologues on either side of the us versus them wedge issues would have us think. If we were to accept it all as normal, there is still a huge difference between a business making a profit and a profiteer profiteering on its victims. And that's something I think is lost on a lot of people for reasons that I couldn't even begin to explain, but that I would have some, my suspicions about why. Okay, Labor Day weekend signifies the beginning of the end of summer and the beginning of the chaos that is midterm election season. And this year, it already kind of started early, right? With all kinds of hype talk from the right about a red wave so strong that Sarah Palin has lost to a Democrat. I didn't think it would be possible. I did not think that was going to happen. I'm not a betting man. I think it's a losing proposition in terms of, it being a vice, an addiction, and a silly waste of money. But I digress. If I were a betting man, I would have lost that bet. If someone had said, what do you think is going to happen in Alaska, yo? Is Sarah Palin just going to stay strong up there? I would have probably missed the mark. Mostly because I don't pay a lot of attention to Alaska politics at a deep granular level, and I didn't, I'm just not like that about politics. My concern with politics is at a transcendence level. Like, I'm not here to perpetuate the system. I'm here to ask, why aren't we transcending this system if the one thing everybody on all sides agrees is there's problems? The left, the right, the independents, in the middle, and those who do not participate. By the way, people assume a lot about me. The right tends to assume I'm some sort of delirious, blind, following leftist, and the left tends to assume I'm some sort of weird, fringy rightist that's sort of centrist-leaning, but still over there on the right for some reason. I don't get that. I'm a non-participant, yo. I'm an outside observer commenting from a perspective that's apparently not allowed, or at least severely underappreciated. I'm here to tell you what y'all sound like as someone observing you amidst you, and that is not participating in the system other than as an observer. So for everyone out there that's ever assumed that I'm criticizing their golden-haired, Christ-sent, savior because I'm blindly addicted to the left, well, I'm sorry to tell you, you're wrong. And you shouldn't go around making assumptions about people and then presuming that your assumptions are correct without doing a little bit of due diligence. And for those on the left who presumed incorrectly that I was a righteous brother in arms for the leftist cause, sorry to disappoint you, not there either. Now, to be very clear, I'm not a monolithic thinker in any direction. Do I hate the left? No. Do I hate the right? No. Despite anyone assuming otherwise and telling me so, I hate no one. I do not even hate dear old Donald J. Trump. I simply cannot, in any way, shape, or form, blindly agree with those who are trolling and badgering those who refuse to agree with Donald Trump. If you're, the biggest gripe against me from Donald Trump supporters, besides the inherently inaccurate assumption that I'm a blind faith Biden voter and supporter, which I'm not, didn't vote for the guy, did not vote for Biden, did not vote for anybody on the left. Dun, dun, dun. Told you, non-participant. I'm here to observe as an impartial observer, asking the questions that I don't see very many other people asking. Such as, how on earth is it that people who claim to research everything and people who claim to be thinking for themselves, how on earth can you continue to give your vocal support for a guy with 50 years worth of history of obvious lying, cheating, scamming, and con artistry? That's not the left telling me to say that. That's me looking at Donald Trump's public record for myself. That's me being someone who's been aware of Donald Trump as a public figure since as long as he's been a public figure. That's my assessment as someone who's been having these kinds of conversations with people on all sides of the political spectrum and asking them, how can you support this or that, or why, how can you think that this or that is true when this or that, asking questions, not out of hate, not out of a meaningless sense of trolling for trolling's sake, but out of an understanding that is an inherently important process in public discourse. How can you continue to support any politician who clearly and obviously proves through their own words and actions that they are hypocritical, unreliable in their word and in their actions, especially to the level that Donald Trump is? Before he ever ran, the man has a lifelong record of cheating and stealing, being dishonest, and not being true to his word. That's not me deliriously hating him. That's me going, look at the record. Look at the decades worth of lawsuits against him from people who he cheated in business. Look at his personal life and look at his divorce record. How can anyone who claims to endorse Christian family values, which I have an issue with to begin with, but there's a pin on the corkboard already. But how can anyone simultaneously say that they endorse, believe in, and try to live by Christian family values? Look at a man who has cheated on, divorced, and then cheated on and divorced every woman he's ever tried to marry like, what? Seriously? And that's not me deliriously hating him. That's me going, this is a matter of historical record. Every wife he's married, he cheated on. With the next woman he was going to marry and then cheat on. You can't be for quote-unquote Christian family values and then just pretend that's not real about the guy. Not if you're going to simultaneously judge and spew character assassination attacks at those on the left for their immorality in the same department. I don't hate Donald Trump. I just do not think he is God's politician anointed by Christ to save America from the evil, satanic, baby-eating leftists. Sorry, I just can't agree with any of the words in that sentence. Let alone the stuff about Donald Trump. I don't hate the left, yo. I don't blindly support the left, yo. Just like I don't blindly support the right. I don't blindly support the middle. I don't blindly support those who do not vote. I'm an alien from another dimension sent here to observe you and then go, hey guys, have y'all stopped to wonder about this and that? That's the most accurate description of me. I'm also just a human being, right? From a different country than this one, that loves this country, but doesn't understand how people can continue to perpetuate the obviously dysfunctional ideological wedge issues of argumentation that are clearly, inherently built into the political landscape. There is a double-barrel echo chamber in this country. One of the barrels, one of the silos, is the left versus the right. The other silo, quite curiously, is the right versus the left. They each have the exact same narrative, just in inverse polar opposite directions of each other. And they each bifurcate everyone inside of them into never-endingly fracturing wedge issues of us versus them ideological argumentation. Doesn't matter if you're in the left or the right or the middle or those who do not participate in. If you are blindly agreeing with politicians and arguing with those who cannot blindly agree with your favorite politicians on either side, in any direction, then you're caught up in one of these echo chambers of the left versus right system, right? And it cuts in every direction. And I know, because I have been sucked into it at times in my life. let me be very clear, my friends. I don't pretend to be perfect. I don't pretend to be an expert in anything. I don't pretend to be anything I'm not. I'm a flawed individual, no better than anyone else. But I am someone who has never stopped actually asking questions when something does not make sense to me. And following Donald Trump has never made sense to me. Politics makes sense in a way to a certain extent, but the way the politics works in this country that I love and that I wish no ill towards and that I just hope would grow up a little and transcend its current collection of malarkey so that we can all get on with the business of helping each other make everything amazing. Is that some sort of radical communist plot? No. What? I've been accused of that so many times I don't even understand. How can me saying that I think we as a collective, we as a community of communities, we as a nation, because I include myself as a member of this community, even though I'm an outsider, I'm here perfectly legally, I have all my paperwork, I can show you my papers if you insist, but I will then ask you why you insisted. And what does that mean that you insisted? But I digress. This pause before the chaos, it fascinates me. And we are consumed as a culture in arguing about it instead of building consensus around real solutions. I don't know how many times I try to engage Trump supporters in civil discourse about the absurdity of Trump's claims. Now, that's not me belittling the Trump supporter. That's me criticizing Trump as a politician, which every citizen and or member of a political community has the right to do. Even technically, I'm not a citizen, but I am a permanent legal resident alien. That's where I get the joke from about being an alien from another planet, right? Like, it's funny that y'all call us aliens. And it would take me money I don't have and a little bit of, high school level effort to become a citizen, which I would. But then I'd have to vote, and then I couldn't speak as freely about... Well, I guess I could. I could speak even more freely, probably, because then I'd be respected more by those whose first criticism would be, who the fuck are you to say anything? You're not a citizen here. I'm a human being, right? And that's where my God-given free right gives me the freedom to discuss and civilly and civically analyze with civility and civic-mindedness anything and everything. And because this is the context wherein I live, as opposed to any other country, I'm going to focus on this country, whilst then expanding my overall thoughts, to the world. This pause before the storm is an opportunity for us, I think, to take a step back and go, isn't it weird how chaotic and crazy and ideologically driven the discourse becomes as we process these things we call election cycles? And how instead of spending all of that time, all of that effort, all of that energy, all of that money that is spent on any given typical election cycle, and I don't know, and I'm not a betting man, like I've said, but I wouldn't be surprised one wee bit if at the end of this particular upcoming election cycle of midterms 2022, Is it 2022 or is it 2021? It's 2022. If it turns out that it was the single most expensive election cycle of all American history, like the most amount of money spent on political ads, flyers, banners, blah, 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 all the political accoutrement and activity that is typical of an election cycle. What if we spent all that time, all that energy, all that passion, all that money on feeding those who are hungry, healing those who are sick, housing those that are without shelter, clothing those that do not have clothes, and, generally doing the kinds of things that, Jesus suggested doing? If we're going to sit around arguing about whether or not this country is supposed to be or isn't supposed to be a Christian nation, we could maybe back the fuck up and talk about whether or not we even understand what Jesus taught. But put a pin in that, because we've had plenty of discussion about that in the podcast series. If you have yet put a pin on the corkboard, there really already ought to be one. I mean, I'm just saying, If you're a new listener, put a pin up on the corkboard. If you're a returning listener, please reference your collection of pins on the corkboard about this subject. I hope that anyone and everyone listening, and I know that I speak very focusedly about American culture, and curiously, more foreigners in other countries listen to my podcast than Americans in America do. Hello, everyone from around the world. It is a great honor and pleasure and humbling thing to know that this silly little erratically posted and very often disorganized podcast, because I'm not going to pretend that I'm like super organized and very highly produced. I'm not. I'm just a guy talking into a microphone about the things on my mind in the moment that I'm talking. This show is listened to in 25 plus countries around the world by about 4 people in each country. And for that, I say thank you. I'm humbled and honored, and please do tell your friends about the show. And please forgive me if all I ever ramble on about is what I'm observing here in these absurdly, delightfully, hyper-political, supposedly United States of America. I love this place, right? I love its positive eccentricities. And I'm deeply concerned by its negative eccentricities, and I don't want to fight and blame and accuse that group or this group or that. I'm just saying, hey, why can't we all see past the treadmills? Why can't we all get off the treadmills? That's why I ask, between the left and the right, if I had to suddenly start voting, if citizenship were somehow magically induced upon me today, right? Someone out there listening, oh, you're not a citizen? Kapow! I've made you a citizen. Now, go vote, because we need... Which no one is going to do, right? The right loves to paranoidly pretend that somehow the left is giving non-citizens the right to vote. Bullshit. If I were to walk into a voting election booth center and try to vote, I would be promptly rejected and probably, I'm not sure, but probably indicted of violation of voting law. So I don't understand how the right believes such claims. Why the voting base of the right will wildly believe such absurd claims. I can assure you, I can attest to you, dear listener on the right, as a non-citizen, I've never been allowed to vote. I cannot vote. I couldn't pull off secretly voting. They would catch it, and I would probably be indicted of a misdemeanor or some sort of voting related federal crime, and it would suck, and I wouldn't do it. And I don't know of teeming millions of foreigners that are doing it. I digress. We are about to enter a tumultuous time where the heat of the rhetoric will be set to a hard boil for the purposes of whipping up each perspective base, right? I mean, you can see it already. It's already been happening. I'm just saying, we just had a nice couple day, extra day weekend where for a hot second, it was just all on repeat. Nothing new. But brace yourselves, friends. I wish I'd already made the meme, and I wish it was the cover of this episode. It's not. Brace yourselves. I almost said House of Dragons meme, which would be technically close but incorrect. The Game of Thrones meme with the dude and the sword and the winter is coming. Political shenanigans and rhetorical madness, a chaos storm of us versus them, ideologically driven wedge issue thinking is upon us, friends. Now, is that me judging people in the system and who participate in the system? Of course not. That's me assessing critically the functionalities of the cultural, political machinery as it seems to operate from my perspective. Not stated with hate, but with alarm, yes. Because that rhetoric is increasingly, unfortunately, and tragically, leading to more and more real-life consequences of personal tragedies vis-a-vis acts of politically inspired violence, which people are quite insidiously cheering on in some instances, while simultaneously pretending to maintain some moral high ground against their opposition. The right and the left will be pitted against each other in new and exciting ways that will make decades past political fervor seem like child's play. I mean, the reality is there are people all over the spectrum downright convinced that it would be foolish not to expect a civil war to erupt in the not-too-distant future. And that, my friends, is truly lamentable. It's a tragedy in and of itself. That things have gotten so cuckoo crazy, nut job, like us versus them. Let's not think past that level of mutual indignation over the malarkey that is politics, which we could, instead of hating each other about, we could just transcend. Never mind fixing. Transcend. Now, a lot of people out there may not understand what that means, and that's fine. A lot of people out there may have inaccurate assumptions about what they think I mean by that, and that's fine. Public discourse is about navigating those circumstances and communicating not past each other, but with one another. Everyone's entitled to believe whatever they want to believe. Everyone has the free speech right to say whatever they want to say. Now, free speech has never been speech without consequence, especially when it comes to the arena of public discourse. You can't expect to just blurt out any old thing and not have people respond to it. And that's a double-edged sword that cuts all four directions. An analogy that I think I might have invented myself. As opposed to, it cuts both ways. My concern as an observer of this community of communities, of this grand experiment in quote unquote democracy is that it neglects its potential for truly solving problems, collectively speaking, as a sort of beyond the control of any one individual. The collective seems to prefer the agitation and chaos of us versus them, wedge issue driven, and ideologically motivated, rhetorically skewed argumentation. But there's always hope, friends. There is always hope for transcending the mentality with which we created the problems that we're complaining about. These solutions will never be found in pitting ourselves against one another. These solutions will never be found in the us versus them dynamic of my party is pure virtue and your party is pure evil. And no matter how you slice it, the left says that about the right says that about the left, and they each pretend that their own statement of that sort of nonsense isn't nonsense. Me questioning any politician is not hate speech. Although people tend to tell me that, especially the fuck your feelings crowd over there that you know, casually and continually chooses to behave in a sort of elementary school playground bully hate speechy kind of way, and then can't stand it when anyone asks them questions about why they think that's a sustainable ideological political rhetoric. I saw a meme recently that I'd like to make a variation on. It says, what does it say? Oh, let me open it up and I'll just read it to you. I'm sorry for those who I'm getting live, real-time personal messages from. Can't chat now. I'm on a podcast. Well, let's play a musical break and we'll come back, talk about this meme, and then wrap up this show. DJ Zed, take it away, please. You can listen to and enjoy tracks you've never heard on this podcast, as well as some of the classic favorites featured on this podcast of DJ Zed and I's Discotheque Synthetica by visiting soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo. Okay, folks. So having said everything I just said in the opening, in the first bit, just there, I'd like to assert the following. Like Einstein said, I'm of the humble opinion that we cannot solve the problems we encounter and unfortunately spend a lot of time disagreeing about with the tools of ideological infighting. We cannot solve the political dilemmas that we find ourselves in with the political argumentation that we use to create those dilemmas. We cannot fix a machine with tools used to destroy the machine, right? Like, you can't heal a person by butchering them. You can't prove you're right about something by only declaring that anyone who disagrees with you is wrong. And you won't solve the problem at the core nexus of all of that argumentation by just making claims of being right. Okay, having asserted that, I remember that we left off before the musical break talking about a meme that's floating around that I think is pretty intensely solid, on point, and that I think I'd like to make a variant of. It's a black and white image of text and word bubbles, or thought bubbles, and it's, sort of like the nobody, them, me kind of thing, or whatever. There's the first thing is MAGA GOP, and it's just a huge cloud of individual thought bubbles or word, dialogue bubbles that say fuck you. Then it says Biden in the middle, and there's one little thought word bubble that says fuck you back. And then MAGA GOP again. And the thought bubbles branch out. Hey, with 3 exclamation points. Apologize. Divider in chief. Condescending. Fascist. The post-Trumptopian GOP is a living example of people who are sweating in the kitchen and can't take the heat. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. It's one thing to utilize free speech and get fervent and perhaps get a little zealous or impassioned in one's language. It's another to programmatically, in a knee-jerk way, refuse to even consider the comments, questions, and assertions of someone you've stoked an argument with, and utilize almost exclusively conflict-oriented bullying language. I have often, again and again, been sanctioned by those I engage with conversation on the right. On the left, I get a little bit. I get a bit less of this hypocritical sanctioning, because I'm not saying that in any kind of monolithic way the left is better than the right. But as I was beginning to say earlier and got sidetracked, if you forced me to vote tomorrow, I would probably vote for the left more often than the right. Because while I do not think that they are virtuous and true to their word and 100% resplendently free of flaws or corruption or questionable issues, which I do not think they are in any way, shape, or form, so don't pretend that I do, I do, generally speaking, agree with the policies being implemented to the best of my ability to understand them, and the results that I can tangibly see in the world of the left than of the right. Why I have been chastised and rebuked and sanctioned quite often by people who I'm trying to engage in public discourse because I question their adherence and loyalty to a guy with a 40-plus year track record of near criminal, very mob-like behavior and activity. And who has literally exemplified through his words and his actions that he's not actually what you claim to want in office. That's the thing that really drives me nuts. The right has forever long claimed that the left is a monolith of pure evil and that they want a righteous, true to their word fighter for the little people to be in the White House in order to achieve great things that benefit the little people in America. The right has long claimed that they want someone who is Christ-like in their behavior and action. The right has long claimed that they want leadership that has the moral high ground. And all I've been asking from the day that Donald Trump announced he was running for office is, how can you look at, because this is before he spoke a word in politics, from the moment I heard he was announcing, and I turned on Fox News, because I don't blindly and irrationally only consume media from one side or the other. I pay attention to all the different platforms, and I'm well aware of the problematic issues with mass corporate media. I love it how Johnny Come Lately start coming at me with don't you know that all the companies are owned by the same 7 people? I'm like, dude, I've been having conversations like this with people like you since 1986. I've been reading conspiracy theory content, both absurd and malarkey riddled, and kind of accurate and maybe not so far from the truth, since 1986. I get it. Although I may not be 100% ready to give a TED Talk on any given conspiracy theory up to speed and memorized, I'm very well informed and on the broad strokes. I've seen most of it all and heard most of it all. In fact, one of the issues I have with conspiracy theory content is that, supposedly, quote-unquote, new conspiracy theory content often, to me, an old-timer, feels really second-handed, regurgitated, recycled, and repackaged. But I digress. That's been on the corkboard. We've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again. The thing I've been trying to do since the day Donald Trump announced that he was running for office is ask a very simple question. How can anyone with the... Let me start. How can anyone who's about to vote look at the guy do an earnest review of his lifelong record of lying and cheating and stealing and scamming people, that's not a made-up accusation. Take a look at his court cases. How can you look at that and say, oh yeah, Jesus picked him to save us from the baby-eating leftists? Well, maybe it's because you believe in baby-eating leftists to begin with. That's a whole nother pin on the corkboard. He is not in any way, shape, or form the virtuous, Christ-like figure that mind-bogglingly people say he is. I have seen both, what am I trying to say? What am I trying to get at? Where are we? it's been 6 years, friends, and I've seen people bend over backwards at every instance of hypocrisy and failure and lack of integrity that Trump has exuded since getting into office. And I keep asking, like, how can you continue to do that? How can you continue to pretend that this guy is in any way, shape, or form the righteous, virtuous, Christ-like, God-sent hero that this mythology has been created? Like, how? When he clearly and obviously panders to the lowest intentions, he clearly and obviously milks his own base and takes their money under misleading and often inherently false pretenses, and has not done half, if not 2/3 of the things that he claimed he was going to do. Yes, did he achieve a few interesting things, some of which I even can't disagree with, because there are a few political, policy things that he instantly, actually I can't disagree with that, because I'm not blindly outraged at him because the media told me to. I've just been aware of him as a public entity. He's a buffoon of a man. And I say that because I was well aware of him long before he ran for office, and he has since then exhibited a plethora of buffoonery. I mean, the biggest, pivot, two-faced, obvious example that I just can't believe people just kept going with him was when he went from the coronavirus is a lie, it doesn't exist, to I am collaborating with Big Pharma, you should take these vaccines. And I get to get a straight answer from anybody about that. Like, they don't want, when I engage in public social discourse about it, I'm like, bro, how could you keep supporting him after that moment? And people just stare at me like, And when I post, how... It doesn't make sense to me. I already made that was totally the point of my last episode. But what is the point of this episode? Moving forward from all of this, right? As we sit in this moment of pause, which I think is going to last till about Friday, when we'll get news about who the special master might be, right? And this whole thing with the FBI and the search and stuff is just beyond the level of the coronavirus example I just gave, right? At this point, how can you continue to support a guy who literally said, I'm going to uphold all the laws about classified information, and then proceeded to do exactly the thing that everyone was accusing his opponent of having done, which they then failed to entirely prove, even though they keep pretending that it was totally 100% verified and proven, right? Where was the evidence? Why didn't they take it to the DOJ? That's the thing about conspiracy theory, especially the ridiculously flawed ones. A, it all pretends to be a monolith of virtuous truth when it clearly isn't. B, there's a broad spectrum of it, which comes in at different quality levels and different levels of even having nuggets of truth in it, which I've always said, conspiracy theory relies on having nuggets of truth in it in order to suck people in. And the net result of people's behavior in the world is the metric by which we should be analyzing both politics and conspiracy theory content, right? Because let me say it again. I'm sure I'll have to say it again many, many times. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Criticizing conspiracy theory content does not mean I irrationally deny that conspiracies occur. In fact, it's like those who are attached to the conspiracy theory label refuse to hear the second half of my big thesis, which is like the content is riddled with neurolinguistic programming as much, if not more, than any mainstream media content. And the group that would benefit the most from the way it impacts people behaviorally are those engaged in the actual conspiracies. But they're like, oh, so you don't think conspiracies exist? Oh, you are so ignorant. You don't understand that this and that and this and that. I'm like, no, that's not at all. You're just projecting. You're refusing to hear what I'm saying. I'm saying, yeah, the rich and the powerful and the elite conspire. Yeah, the greedy want to profiteer. Yeah, the warmongers want to warmonger. Hello? Go look at things I've been talking about for the last 15, 20 years on social media. Yes, I kind of eased into it back into the day because, well, arguably, I was a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of like bold, outlandish statements, but also something that's lost on people, and I just want to state for the record, I've been online since an Apple IIgs was the most cutting-edge machine competing with IBM, right? And I've been online. That's before AOL existed. AOL, America Online, launched whilst I was already deeply involved in being an online citizen of the internet, engaging in public discourse for the sake of questioning that which people delivered at me as absolute truth. I don't hate anyone or anything. But if you're going to come at me with a claim that is supposed to be absolute truth, I believe it is my intellectual responsibility to say, okay, let me ask you some questions. Because if you're saying that's absolutely true, and you want me to just blindly agree, and if I don't, you're just going to spew hate speech at me, then that suspiciously sounds to me like what neurolinguistic indoctrination is designed to do. And if refusing to allow me to question your absolute truth is your first knee-jerk response to me going, I have a few questions about your claim there, then you're not really having an open-minded intellectual discussion. You're just regurgitating content that was spoon-fed to you by a corporate algorithm, taking offense at anyone that questions you about it, and turning into a playground bully. Which, from my understanding, is exactly what they, quote-unquote, they, that are the conspiracy, that's what they want people to do. Because the more people do that, and debate whether or not it's purple aliens from Uranus or robots from Saturn, the less they are capable of collaboratively developing real, effective, tangible solutions to the problems that we ourselves as a collective species have created for ourselves. Forgive me, I feel like a broken record, because that's my central concern. Do you want to argue more? Or do you want to actually solve the problems? Do you want to keep assigning blame and hyper-vilifying people you don't know? Or do you want to actually solve the problems? Do you want to cling to rhetoric? Or do you want to actually solve the problems? Do you want to cling to a political party? Or do you want to actually solve the problems? Do you want to cling to an ideologue? A cult of personality leader? Or do you want to actually solve the problems? And I ask that of everybody, not just the Trump supporters, yo. I ask the Trump supporters the way a teacher asks a rowdy student in class so that everyone can contemplate the question. Not out of hate, but out of deep compassion and concern for what's going on in this great country. Because this country has greatness all over it. Because people can be great. Hello, have you seen some of the wonderful things that people have achieved throughout history? But those same people can also be odiously horrible to themselves and to each other. And I include myself in that. It's an analysis of myself as much as it is an analysis of anyone else. No one loves the idea that they themselves can have been, might have been, could be the one that was totally in the wrong and being a toxic, redonkulous a-hole about it. But we each, every single one of us, have that inherently in us, right? We all can be totally dead wrong about something and end up acting in a ridiculously toxic way about it. I don't blindly accuse others of being in that modality without acknowledging that I have done that and apologizing for it. Because, throwing rocks in glass houses, throwing rocks at all, never mind whether or not we're in a glass house. Rocks hurt, yo. You ever been pegged in the head by a rock, even a little tiny pebble that someone chucked at you in maliciousness? I had to get really good at catching things. And to this day, if something's going right at my face, my hands act before my brain can even articulate the threat. But my point is, we have more in common than the political ideologues would care for us to acknowledge. We have more in common than the organized religious ideologues would care for us to acknowledge. We have more in common than even the New Age spiritual ideology would care for us to acknowledge, even though a lot of that is about how we're all one, right? There's still a lot of I'm better than you because I know we're all one. But I digress. That's a whole nother discussion that we've already broached upon in some episodes in the past, and I'm sure we'll come back to talk about in the future. Pin on the corkboard. In my opinion, to kind of build into a conclusion here and a landing point to end this episode, to solve the problems, which is what I'm interested in, right? I engage in public discourse to ask these questions and hopefully get to the point where it's okay, cool, awesome, let's solve the problem now. Donald Trump was sent by Jesus, great. I was wrong about that, fine. Let's solve the actual problems now. Oh wait, Donald Trump was just another petty criminal that sort of thought he was, going to be a mob crime boss in politics and now he's going to jail. Great, fine, whatever. It's been sorted out. Now let's solve the fucking problems, please. Because the problems have been persistently getting worse throughout. And so my questioning of anything out there in social media is to bring the conversation to that point by drawing you all in here to this podcast and this discourse here. To solve the problems, to get to my final point, we cannot use the tools that we built them with. So we must first evolve beyond the context that we're in, right? Politically, economically, ideologically, spiritually, socioeconomically, religiously, in all the ways that we can evolve towards transcending our contexts. In other words, I don't think we'll solve anything by repeating the argument about which political party is which political party. They both have their problems. I don't think we're going to solve the problem by entrenching ourselves in more us versus them ideological constructs. I don't think we're going to solve the problem by continuing to perpetuate a system that doesn't solve problems, but rather focuses on how to maximize profits in the name of solving problems. From Big Pharma to Trump's Stop the Steal, the real egregious action on any and all sides is the profiteering in the name of solving problems. And Is that something we should go to war over? No, that's absurd. Is that something we should hate each other about? No, that's absurd. It won't solve the problem. Is that something we should threaten public violence driven by political ideology and rhetoric about to see if we can? No, that doesn't solve the problem. Is that something we should just vote harder about? Not necessarily, unless it solves the problem. Unless we're voting for something that actually addresses the problem and tries to solve it. There's a lot of problems. Now, do the problems have interconnected roots? I suspect so, right? Does the multitude of problems that we could infinitely argue about maybe, just maybe, have some core connections deeper down under the surface of all of the rhetoric and the ideology and the arguing? Gee, I'm not 100% sure, but it seems incredibly likely to me that that is very well the case. I don't pretend to have proof of anything. I'm saying, why don't we investigate in that direction instead of bashing each other over the head? You'll like bashing each other over the head a lot. Okay, I'll see you bashing each other over the head, and I'll bash you over the head with my questions that point in this direction. No matter which side, if you've come to listen to this podcast, I ask you this, dear friend. It doesn't matter what political party you belong to. It doesn't matter which side you identified with. It doesn't matter, the context you were in before. Would you rather keep doing the same things over and over again that you've found yourself doing over the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that the collective has been entrenched in doing for the last 100 years? Or would you rather solve the problems? Without morally abusing each other in, egregiously ego-driven judgment and shame-driven bullying. We can solve the problems without all this chaos, right? I think. I am of the humble opinion that humanity, at large, as a collective, can set aside all of its diverse oddities and vices and eccentricities and obsessions and rhetoric and ideology and addictions collectively in order to collaboratively address the problems as they exist, as we created them. Because no matter how you slice it, we, the human species, created the problems that we, the human species, are arguing and fighting over. We created them. No one else did. A robot from Mars did not create them. An evil, villainous vampire that eats baby brains did not create them. We, the human species, created them. We were arguably put here on this earth in order to go through this process. Right? Although, who knows? I don't know. I don't pretend to know about anything beyond that which I have experienced. And while I have experienced some very intensely bizarre and difficult to talk about things that are definitely on the quote-unquote paranormal side of things, I don't pretend that suddenly makes me absolutely, righteously, virtuously, inherently correct in all things. I'm still a flawed simpleton that is like, hey guys, I don't pretend to know the answer to everything, but here are my questions. Let's discuss. Here are my questions. Why would anyone invest their identity attachment into any politician at a pseudo-religious level? on any side of a political spectrum divide, right? Why would anyone so over-identify with a politician that any questioning of that politician is a personal attack on them? It doesn't make sense to me. Please help me make sense. And if it can't be made to make sense, then maybe we should discuss how we can disentangle ourselves from doing that. If it really doesn't make sense to pledge our blind loyalty to a politician and identify with them in a pseudo-religious way to the point that any intellectual critique of them is a personal attack on that individual voter's personal identity, we need to find ways to facilitate the abdication of such behavior, because it doesn't make any sense and it doesn't do anyone any good. What good does that do to choose to engage that way in the political process? Like, what does that achieve? I don't see any benefit to it, other than it makes it impossible to transcend the circumstances of us versus them ideological rhetorical discourse. It makes it near impossible. If you're so bound up in your identity with the politics that you're politicking, then you cannot transcend your politics. And instead you suspect and look at with dubiousness and doubt at anyone that might suggest transcending the political circumstances that you're bound up in. Now, why do I encourage this? If we could vote on how we vote, why would I vote towards transcending politics entirely? Because in the history of politics in all its forms, because politics is not just voting, right? Politics is all of the shenanigans that go on in the maneuverings of people in power in order to exercise that power, in order to manage and delegate the kinds of meta activities that seem inherently necessary for the existence of nation states. That's what politics is, not just voting. And politics is not just arguing about who to vote, right? Politics is not just the function of any particular office of state. It's all of it. And it includes the contrivances of the behind the scenes activities and the plebeian public activities on the street of this sort of arguing about who is morally right and who is morally wrong in this arena of political discourse. And I see very little of that activity actually solving the problems. There's a lot of lip service towards the promise of solving the problems. There's a lot of smoke screening and shenanigans about, political rhetoric discussing the problems, and I see a lot of promises and sort of empty spear rattling around the problems and who's at fault for the problems. And I see a lot of moral indignation, both warranted and imaginary, about the problems and who's at fault for the problems and who's causing the problems and who's responsible for the problems. But I'm not really seeing a lot of solving of the problems. And I, for one, know that I can't solve the problems by myself. And I, for one, cannot agree with those who say, well, if you can't solve the problem by yourself, who gives a fuck? Walk away, don't engage. That doesn't make any sense either. I mean, there's a lot of people spewing that interesting statement. You cannot solve the problems by yourself, so just step away from the arguing and live your life. Okay, that makes sense at a certain level, because we must disengage from the rhetorical us versus them echo chambers. But I think we also sort of must solve the problems. You won't solve the problems by just focusing on your own microbiome, your own immediate circumstance. If all I did was do what I wanted to do according to my own sense of desires and interests, without engaging in public discourse, without engaging with the public at large and discussing these issues, I wouldn't be in any way, shape, or form contributing towards any solution, towards any problem, right? There are a series of unexplored paths. Between every two extremes, there's always a middle set of postulates, right? Between any two political extremes, there's always a new middle ground to be discovered, even as the old middle ground is sort of torn apart and pulled in one or the other direction. Because it's an ever-evolving sort of landscape as rhetoric evolves, as ideologues change their position. But the solutions to the problems, I think, will not be found by repeating the same activities over and over again. I think the solutions to the problems will be found by transcending all that we've been caught up in. And by saying, you know what? Yeah, maybe we don't need a left versus right paradigm. Maybe we don't need to personally identify with each politician as if they were some sort of benighted God soldier. Maybe we don't need to believe in parties. I know that sounds crazy talk to some people, but maybe we can transform all these things in a way that is not about proving one thing right and the other thing false, but rather solving the problems, right? Because the problems persist. From homelessness to corporate corruption, the problems persist. From outrageous outbursts of violence and and chaos and tragedy to the profiteering of perpetual warfare, the problems persist. So do the joys and the glorious, miracles and the little wonders and the private pleasures of life. I'm not immune to that. I'm not lost from that. I'm not disconnected from that. And I'm not underappreciating that. Plenty of people bring me that critique too. Like, oh, you're so doom and gloom. Like, no. It's all there. It's all there. But I ask you, dear friends, can we please step off the treadmills? Can we please stop over-identifying with politicians on either side of the political spectrum? Can we please drive our political public discourse towards a more rational analysis of the problems? Can we please disengage with the trolling and the owning and re-engage with the solving of the problems? Is that really too much to ask? Is that such a weird thing to say that you're going to be butthurt and offended when I try to bring that into the discourse as a criticism of both political parties? Because what a lot of people seem to misunderstand about me is that, I'm fairly convinced that despite their actual practical and pragmatic differences, at the very top, both political parties are inherently complicit with each other in perpetuating the problems and perpetuating the argumentation about the problems and perpetuating the ideological distraction from the solution to the problems. And that doesn't mean I think both parties must be hated. That doesn't mean I think both political parties' bases are to be judged and belittled and ridiculed. I think it means we all need to set aside our differences and re-engage in public discourse from a fresh perspective, which is simply, okay, cool, everything's crazy, but how do we solve these problems again? Let's just talk about that. Let's just talk about a problem and its actual solutions. Homelessness, how do we solve it? It seems pretty straightforward. Provide shelter. Hunger, how do we solve it? Seems pretty straightforward. Provide food. Disease, how do we solve it? Seems pretty straightforward. Provide care. I could be wrong. And I'm always welcome, like, actual, fair-minded public discourse about what I've had to say. If you come and ask me for my opinion, but you refuse to hear me out, and you immediately interrupt at the first opportunity to tell me that I'm wrong, that I'm ignorant, that I'm a sheeple, then you didn't really want to understand my opinion. And you're going to be informed by me that I'm aware of that I'm seeing that in your behavior. But if you want to hear my opinion, I will sit down and hear you out on yours. And I'm going to ask you questions. That doesn't mean that I hate you. That doesn't mean that I'm attacking you. It means I have questions. And that doesn't mean that I think I'm right and you're wrong. That means I have questions. And I'm encouraging you to answer them so that we can further the discussion towards somewhere that helps us both identify things we can do that contribute towards the solving of the actual problem. Because that's where my concern sits. If I could, I would provide people with shelter. But I, as an individual who have struggled to provide for myself, let alone provide for others, cannot do that. But I can advocate for that. I can make the argument and propose the proposals and support those who share the same idea out there in the world. Yeah, you know what? You can argue all you want about socialism versus communism versus capitalism, but I'd like to provide shelter for those who do not have shelter, period. Not because Jesus said so, but because I would hope someone might help me with that concern should I suddenly find myself lost in the world without shelter. I would pray to whatever gods, to whatever powers might be, right? If I were suffering out there in the world without a home, without enough to eat, without something to protect myself from the elements, and without a means by which to improve my own situation. And it's that reason that motivates me to challenge the status quo, even as the left pretends to sort of play act at solving some of these problems. Funnily enough, they haven't solved them yet, even though they do make little baby steps towards awesome things. You know, generally speaking, if we're going to compare policy, you're never going to get me to blindly support the right the way the right wants to be blindly supported. I'm going to applaud the left for the things that I can agree with that they get done, and I'm going to ask them about the things that they're not getting done. And yeah, that's the state of the world as I see it. I do think that the right is a little bit more egregiously outlandish when compared to the left. Is the left a virtuous stronghold of absolute truth? Hell no. Is the left some righteous God sent? No, that's ridiculous. Is the left morally superior to everyone else? Of course not. Is the left free of problematic issues and corruption and bad apples? No one, I've never said so. No one can accuse me of pretending to think that, because I do not think that. Have I spent the last 5 years a little bit more focused on critiquing the Trumptopian exploitation of the right? Yes, because that's way more wildly out there in the terms of egregiousness than the problematic issues that I can confirm are real on the side of the left. Because they're caught up in the fantastical use of completely made-up nonsense over there on the right. There's some really wild and wacky, completely made-up nonsense that is passed around as gospel truth and causing people to get whipped into a frenzy, both politically and emotionally, that needs to be called out. That's way more urgently, alarming and concerning than the problematic issues on the left, to the best of my ability to discern what they are. And until I see evidence otherwise, I'm going to keep my 60-40 balance of hey, lefty over there, y'all ain't perfect. Dear Democratic Party, y'all have some problematic issues that need to be addressed. But yes, in the meantime, I will rally with you to be whoa, Trumptopia. Where do you want to go? What is going on? And how can you keep giving your support to this very strange, orange, sun-sprayed tanned guy that is just a big, huge living example of everything you claim you do not want in politics? That's what I got to say about that. Thank you for joining me, friends. We will continue to travel through time and respond to the events of the day on a not quite almost daily basis. And thank you for your support and tuning in to listen. By all means, ask your questions. I encourage audience interaction. That's why I've got Facebook pages and multiple places you can listen to this podcast for. Please be advised, if your only tactic is to act like a playground bully and call me names and tell me that I'm wrong without explaining why, then you're just going to get a giggle react and a heart emoji. A hug emoji. Hugs and cool, pat on the head. I'm glad you got it out of you that you need to call me names. But do you want to help me solve some problems? Because no matter how much you call me names, them problems still sitting around and they need solving. And that's what I'm concerned with. I'm not here to call people names and tell people they're wrong just because I'm on that camp or versus this camp. That's never solved anything as far as I can tell. And if you agree with me, then let's discuss solutions that we have as of yet arrived at and how do we arrive at them. Because that's where we will then discover solutions, right? Especially to the things that are increasingly complex and more complicated than the fundamental problems. But because there's problems all over the place. And of very complex issues. And yes, there's powerful people conspiring to perpetuate those problems and create new ones. There's also plain old ordinary people conspiring to pretend that the solutions are not worth exploring. And you got to ask yourself, why is that? Why are there whole multitudes of plain old ordinary people that would rather verbally bitch smack you in the face and tell you you're an idiot and call you names and say your ideas are meaningless and that there is no solution to the problems because you don't believe in the things that they believe in? Why is that the case? And how is that fixing anything? All right. I feel like I've started going around in circles. As always, friends, thank you for tuning in. I'll be back with other things and different perspectives. And, of course, more of my literary world-building rough draft sharing as more and more ideas flitter down into me about these book series that I'm writing. And, all that other good stuff that is the many dimensions of the Zeppoverse. If you'd like to explore those dimensions of the Zeppoverse beyond this podcast, I humbly invite you to visit solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. I shall now sign off with the following bit o' music and closing theme song. Let me pick a nice shorty. There we go. There we go.
And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily ZenCast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.